Hey guys, what's going on? Sherman here. I'm really excited to do this review of my very first Emerson knife. So today we're going to be taking a look at the Emerson Mini Commander. Stone wash finish, plain edge. This is a great knife, guys. I've been wanting one of these ever since I started collecting knives about 6 years ago. And I'm really glad I picked this up. I can see myself buying more Emersons now. I can definitely see the appeal, and I can also see some of the things that a lot of people complained about for years about, I'll never own an Emerson because of this or because of that. I can definitely see why some people would complain about this, but I'm going to tell you in a second why I don't think it's very fair at all. But this is a great knife. It's also one of the cheaper knives. If you've ever shopped for Emerson knives, you'd know that they can be kind of pricey for what you get. That's just how they operate. That's just how it is. And you just got to accept that. But this is definitely one of the more affordable models, along with the Horseman and I believe the Mini A100. This being, I paid $135, I believe, shipped from Blade HQ. So that's where I would recommend getting these knives. They have, I believe they have all four versions in stock right now. Both this stone washed version, plain edge and serrated, along with the black coated version, plain edge and serrated. So definitely go check them out there. Just a little quick shout out. Alright, just before I get into this review, I do want to talk about the philosophy, I guess, of owning an Emerson and why I don't think a lot of criticisms are fair towards this knife or towards Emerson knives in general. A lot of people complain, and have complained for years, about the fit and finish. Oh, well, the G10 doesn't meet up with the liners perfectly, or the insides of the liners are roughly finished and have machining marks, and it's not as smooth as my Spyderco. And no, all those things, all those statements are true about this knife. But to say that Emerson doesn't care, they're putting knives together, they don't care about their customers, they don't care about their quality. Ernest Emerson's motto is function over form. His knives were not made and were not designed for the average knife user. This knife was not designed for me and you. This knife was designed for professionals. This knife was designed for fighting and to be used as a tool by the U.S. military. Ernest Emerson started out in the aerospace industry. He was a machinist, and that's probably why these knives are actually issued to astronauts. That is 100% true. You can look it up for yourself. That is not propaganda or hype. And he has taught martial arts for many, many years, many different forms of martial arts. And he's made these knives with them in mind also. These knives were originally made and sold to Navy SEALs and other members of Special Forces. Since then, this knife has been issued to military and law enforcement all around the world. That's who these knives are marketed for. These people don't care if the G10 doesn't meet up with the liners, or that the liners aren't polished, or the knife is slightly sluggish and not as smooth as some other knives. They don't care, because they're using these knives as tools. They're using these as defensive weapons. They don't care. If this knife was specifically designed for everyday carry in mind, yeah, those criticisms would be valid towards Emerson. But since these knives were designed for people other than you and me, the average knife market, it's not a fair criticism whatsoever. Because like I said, this knife was designed with a very specific market in mind. So you can't take something that was designed in a specific way and condemn it completely for all uses. But I'm just going to talk about the knife now. So what you get with most Emerson knives, you get black G10 scales, which are very nice, very grippy. I've always heard about, Emerson's G10. It is very grippy, but it's not painful. It's not sharp like 80 grit sandpaper, but it will tear up your pockets over time. It's a good look at it. Very coarse. I like it. It adds a lot of grip, even when my hands are wet, so I definitely like that. And like I said, this isn't meant to be carried in the pockets of people who carry knives daily. It's meant for, professionals. Anyway, another thing that's great about Emerson is their standard hardware. See Phillips head screws inside those standoffs, Phillips head for the pocket clip, the thumb disc, and a flathead screw for the pivot, which is great because here again, chances are if you're in the military and you're carrying this knife, you're not going to have a Torx bit set laying around, or even some average, knife owners maybe they don't have one all the time, but chances are they're going to find a Phillips head screwdriver somewhere. So that's great. I really love that. I wish more knife companies would do this, just making their hardware more standard. And with the pivot, something that loosens quite frequently on knives, it's great to be able to just pull out a coin, or just what I do, use my thumbnail to tighten that pivot. So I think that's really, really nice. Big, thick, beefy pivot, by the way. I'm not going to take the screw out to show you, but the screw is really thick, which is nice. So it's very, very hard use. These knives are marketed as the #1 hard use tactical knife in the world, and I believe it. So I don't think that's hype. This is one of the new 2013 models that offers standoffs instead of the G10 backspacer like they normally use. Emerson is starting to convert all of their models, I believe, to standoffs, which I prefer because the way they used to do it is the screws would go through, you'd have 4 screws, 2 screw into one side, 2 screw into the other. But a lot of people's screws were stripping on this side, which, by the way, this liner is titanium. Titanium being softer than steel, the screws would strip very easily, which means they'd have to send it back to Emerson. Emerson would have to replace a titanium frame, which can be kind of costly. So I'm glad they're switching over to the standoffs. It is much more sturdy, reliable design, and I happen to like the way it looks better. I like that nice flow-through design. So I like it. It's very nice. They're blackened. The pocket clip is also very nice. Here again, standard, but I believe it is Parkerized, which means it's not going to really scratch or that coating's not going to come off. So I like that. That's very nice. You do have a small lanyard hole, which is nice to put gutted 550 cord through if you want to put a lanyard on here. But that's pretty nice. The handle is pretty thick, which I like. It's not as thick as some, but it's thicker than others, and I like it. Alright, let's show you the blade. You have that beautiful Commander blade shape. And when I think of Emerson knives, I think of the Commander blade shape. It is iconic, really, to Emerson knives, and I just think it's beautiful. So this particular model, this is marketed as the stonewashed finish, which technically it's a two-tone finish because the flats of this blade, you can see the flats of the steel on both sides, they're stonewashed. Very nice stonewash, by the way. The camera doesn't give it justice. But all the grinds, the bevels are satin finished. So you have this swedge up top, which looks nice, and of course the primary grind. They're both satin finished, which I think is beautiful. So technically you get a two-tone finished blade, but it's marketed as stonewash. But I love it. The blade length on this knife is 3.4 inches, so just under 3.5 inches long. Like I said, this is the Mini Commander. So I think that is the perfect everyday carry blade shape or blade size. And it's going to get under a lot of states' knife laws. Most states, if I'm not mistaken, knife law is you can't carry anything over 4 inches. Which is the same in my state. You can't carry anything over 4 inches unless you have a weapons permit, which I do, so it doesn't really matter to me anyway, but I just thought I'd bring that up. But it is a very nice sized blade. 154 cm steel, like on all Emersons, that is just their proprietary steel. Their philosophy is it is kind of the middle ground steel, which is true. I happen to be a big fan of 154 because it is hard enough to hold an edge pretty well, and it's also soft enough that you can touch up relatively easily. So I just happen to like that steel. It's also going to be very corrosion resistant. So, see the markings up here. It's hard to see on my model. It looks like they marked it and then stonewashed it, so it's very hard to see on my model. But it does say MCOM right there for Mini Commander, made in the USA, 2013 underneath Emerson. And there was a model or a serial number underneath the thumb disc, but it wore off. So this knife is made in the USA. It's made in a small shop, not a factory, but a small shop owned by Ernest Emerson and his family. And which I think is cool. Here again, that's part of what you pay for. It's a small operation, very few people, and they don't make a whole lot of knives. You know, they're not mass producing hundreds of thousands of knives a year. So, another thing famous about Emerson is their chisel grinds, So let me just clear this up because a lot of people are confused. A lot of people see this like, well, that's not chisel ground, that's V ground. That's true. This knife has a V ground blade, meaning primary grind here, but it has a chisel edge, meaning they only ground an edge bevel on one side of the blade. The other side is flat. Just like you see knife serrations, they're always chisel ground. Same deal. So here again, one side of the edge, or one side of the blade has an edge ground. The other side's flat. Here again, this is not a complaint. This is not a fair criticism to make about the knife, to say, well, it's not, I don't want that for everyday carry. That's stupid. I don't know why they do that. Here again, it was designed to be used as a tool. In the field, this is going to be much easier to sharpen because you're only going to have to worry about only grinding one side. You're not going to have to worry about getting this side at 15 degrees, this side at 15 degrees, or 13 and 13 degrees. No, you just match this angle, and then you knock the burr off on the other side. Very easy to sharpen. I have touched this up on my Spyderco Sharp Maker once. It was very easy to do because you only have to, like I said, you only have to worry about one side, and then you just strop the other side to knock that burr off. So it is very easy to sharpen. And by the way, this recurve shape is not so dramatic that it is hard to sharpen. Very easy to sharpen and to strop. So don't worry about that. If you guys don't like recurves, don't worry about that, because it was not an issue with this particular knife. So it was very easy to do that, and that is why they have these chisel edges. Now I do see a lot of people that will take one of their rod guided sharpening systems and grind an edge on this side, which I actually might do, but if you're worried about thinness of the edge, I wouldn't. It's held an edge very well for me so far, and it is very sharp right now. 154 cm can hold a really nice edge. But I did want to bring that up. It is a chisel ground edge, but a V ground blade. Now, with the edge being on this side, and you're holding it, you're right-handed, and you go to cut a material, it's going to veer off to the right. If you were to cut a piece of paper straight down, it's going to go to the right, because it's going to take the path of least resistance. The path of least resistance being this side, because it is a much more shallow angle than this side. This is a very steep edge angle compared to this, where it's like a Scandi grind, where it's just, so it's going to take the path of least resistance. So when you're cutting and you're right-handed, it's going to feel kind of awkward. The edge should really be ground on this side for right-handed users. It's just going to cut a little bit more evenly. So I did want to bring that up. It's not a deal breaker whatsoever. It's just something that you would notice. If you're cutting straight down, it's just going to veer off to one side. And but it doesn't inhibit the cutting performance of this knife. Cutting performance is great. It is kind of thick behind that edge, but it's not bad. Being a recurve, it slices beautifully, because all the material is going to be trapped right here, and then it's just going to bust right through once it gets to that very, very nice belly, which a lot of people are going to like. A lot of people want belly in their EDC knives. So it definitely has a lot of that. Very nice. Very sharp tip. Also thick behind the tip, which means it's going to be very strong. Pretty nice blade stock. Average thickness. Deployment options is a thumb disc. It is a blackened thumb disc with a knurl pattern on it. Meaning it's just kind of that checkered pattern, which is going to grip your thumb very nice. It's going to deploy very easily for you if you decide to open it this way. But of course, you have the patented and famous Emerson wave feature, which is just this little hook that catches onto your pocket and deploys the blade as you're pulling out of your pocket, making this the fastest deployment option in a knife today. So very clever, and this was actually discovered by accident. So that's kind of neat. So it's a neat story if you watch some interviews with Ernest Emerson. Something kind of I noticed is that you do have a little bit of the blade protruding out of the handle right here. I don't know if it's purposeful or not. I think it's kind of neat because you can grab this knife like so and use that as an improvised impact device. Use that on people for non-lethal to lethal impacts, and you could also possibly bust out a car windshield if you had to. So I like that. And also you can use this side too, because the end of the handle kind of comes to a point. Another thing to mention, it does have a floating blade stop pin up here. And what that means, if you watched my Spyderco Techno review, it also has the same thing. All it is a stop pin that sets into the handles and it freely spins, so that when you open this blade, especially if you were to wave it open where the blade is really smacking up against that stop pin hard, the way it spins, it makes it so that it doesn't receive wear on just one part. It will spin and distribute the wear over the entire circumference of that pin. Now, because of this, I also noticed when I take it apart, the stop pin also will kind of wobble inside that hole like so. And that is causing a little bit of blade play with this knife. I'm talking about minuscule amount when I'm really torquing on the blade up and down. And I've checked, it's not the lock slipping whatsoever. Because I can take the blade and move it back like this, and I'll hear just a very subtle click. And that means the liner is actually engaging into the tang further. And I can only, and then it has absolutely none, it's rock solid. So I can only assume that the stop pin has just a little bit too much play in it, so that it's actually rocking slightly back and forth as I'm testing for the play. So I don't think it's actually the lock slipping. I'm actually 100% sure that it's not. So I did want to mention that though. I've heard some people say, yeah, I have 8 Emersons. They all have blade play. I've also heard people say, yeah, I have 10 Emersons and I've never had blade play. So it's hit or miss, guys. It's like with every knife. But it is primarily because this knife does have a titanium liner on this side. Emersons have a titanium liner lock with a stainless steel opposite frame, or liner, rather. The only thing I can think of, like the only reason I could think of that they would use titanium for the lock is that since, here again, titanium is softer than steel, since it's titanium against the steel blade, under extreme stress, such as downward force, like if you were to stab, which these knives are used as defensive tools and defensive weapons, or if you're going to go stab into something to pry something open, that lock is going to almost meld into the steel. Because like I said, it is softer and it's going to kind of mold and shape. And whereas if it was steel, it might deform, it might slip because it could be slippery, or it might break. Whereas the titanium is very flexible, that's why it's stronger than steel. It will bend without breaking and will also deform without breaking. So that's the only thing I can think of why he uses titanium instead of steel. But what that does is that it is going to give you variations, because here again, the titanium does wear down much faster than steel. You're going to get wear a lot faster, and you're going to get blade play from time to time. It's just the way it is. But the blade play is decreasing a lot. I do not feel like this knife will ever fail on me. But I did want to mention that. Here's the lockup on mine so far. Kind of late. And just to put it in perspective, when I got it 2 weeks ago, the lock was over here. So that's how far it's worn in. But one of the many cool things about Emerson is that lock wear is actually covered in their warranty. Unlike any other knife company, pretty much, lock wear is covered in their warranty. If your lock wears in, you're not satisfied, send it in, they'll replace it. Emerson has an incredible warranty. So if anything strips, if anything breaks, anything short of cosmetics, they will fix. Which I think is fantastic. They really stand by that from what I've been told. So, when the blade is open, you do have a very nice thumb ramp because of that wave, and I really like that. Also has some nice jimping up top. It is, I would call it medium grade jimping. It does work. You have a very nice finger cutout, finger choil right here. And the lock is actually even with the liner, so it makes for very, very comfortable grip. And I will go out on a limb, and I'll just tell you guys, this is probably the most comfortable knife I've ever held. It is even more comfortable than a Spyderco Military, simply because it just has a very no-nonsense handle shape. It has a very nice finger choil, which means your finger's not going to ride up and you're not going to cut yourself on that edge. It's very deep, but it's also very smooth and comfortable. It has this nice little palm swell right here, and it doesn't have a lot of these weird finger grooves down here to inhibit your grip. It's just extremely comfortable. So overall length of this knife is 8 inches, by the way. So I think that is more than enough for most people. In my hands, which are a large size, I do have a little bit of the handle sticking out, so that's, in my opinion, perfect. So it's just an incredibly comfortable blade. The ergonomics are just outstanding. And in reverse grip also. Just outstanding ergonomics. Very, very well made handle. So very nice. Another thing about this knife that some people might complain about, and also, you know, it is a kind of a complaint of mine, is that it does have kind of a weak detent. As you can see, it kind of has a weak detent. And because of that, it is very hard and almost impossible to flick out with your thumb. You can do it with a little bit of wrist flick, but I also have the pivot tightened down so it doesn't have a lot of side-to-side play, which it doesn't really right now. It doesn't have any. So, which is a huge pet peeve of mine when a knife has side-to-side play. So that's why. But anyway, the knife is very smooth. There's a difference between smooth and, I guess, sluggish deployment. Because it's not gritty at all. Now, when it came, it was very gritty because Emerson uses grease. A lot of times it has copper flakes in it. And what that does is that the more you play with this knife when that grease is in, it actually sands down on a microscopic level like stropping compound does. It sands down the blade area and the liners and also the washers that this knife uses. And it will make the knife smoother in the long run. So I recommend keeping the grease in there as long as you can. But it does make the knife very gritty. But, you know, the knife is very smooth right now, but it just can't be flicked out. It can be slowly controlled open with the thumb, and it feels great doing that. While we're on the subject of pivot and washers, I wanted to mention the washers used in this knife are material called nylotron. They're known as a quote-unquote self-lubricating washer. What they are is that they're like your Teflon washers. They're very thick. I don't know if you guys can see down in there. They're real thick, kind of nylon washers, and they're porous. And they're actually impregnated with silicone. So the more you use it, the more the silicone actually seeps out and keeps them kind of, just kind of moist and lubricated. It really helps with this knife in the long run. Also, something interesting about this knife, and I don't know if you'll be able to see it, but this knife actually has two detents. And some of you may know that, some of you may not. But this actually does have two detent balls. You can see on this side, it has one in the liner like every knife does. Well, every liner locking and frame locking knife. You see the detent ball there. But this side of the blade actually does not have a detent hole. All that detent ball does is make it so the liner doesn't, you know, drag up against the blade. The actual detent ball and hole for the detent of this knife is on this side, the show side of the blade, which is very unusual. But what it does is that this stainless steel frame has a very small cutout. You can see it right down in there. A very small cutout that just springs forward and contacts with the blade, has a detent ball, and it sits into the hole of this knife. Now, the reason being, which I think this is a very cool reason, and I wish, here again, more companies would put some of these things into thought, is that Ernest Emerson wanted you to be able to change the detent of this knife overall without affecting the lockup of this knife and vice versa. Because if you think about it, with most knives, here again I'm just going to use this as an example, you guys can get a visual. You can see the detent ball and hole on this knife. If I wanted to increase the detent, the only way I could do that, since the detent ball is in the lock, I'm going to have to move the lock bar forward into the tang of the blade more. I'm going to have to bend it. So by doing that, you also make the lockup later, decreasing the lifespan of your lock. It's going to wear in tighter and everything like that. So with this design, if you want a tighter detent, you just move that little bar inward. Then you have a tighter detent, but it does not affect your lockup. Or if your lock bar is wearing in and you want to spring it forward to make it lock up tighter, it doesn't affect your detent. So I think that is a really clever idea. And like I said, that's definitely innovative. Emerson's the only company that has that. I've never seen that before. So that might contribute to why it has kind of a weak detent, is because most of the time you have that great force from the lock bar that's going to give you that detent, as opposed to that tiny little cutout, that tiny little nub that moves over. So it doesn't have the same kind of spring force. But it's not, the detent isn't awful. You know, the blade is not coming out of the handle when I shake it. So that's good. But, you know, the detent is too weak to be able to flick the knife. Well, it just did it then, but it took some wrist flick. But, so that's the only one thing that I would consider this to be kind of annoying about the knife. But it's not that bad. You know, but you definitely can't take it and, you know, do that with it. But that's alright. Like I said, that's not really what it was designed to do. But I just wanted to mention that. I thought that was really interesting about this knife and very innovative. One more thing I forgot to mention, but you guys can probably tell, is that the pocket clip is only tapped for tip up right hand carry. Which tip up is kind of a no-brainer. If it was tipped down, you wouldn't be able to use the wave feature. But you can actually go to their website and send this knife in, and I believe you pay $5 and you can get it tapped for left-hand carry. Like I said, I believe it's like $5. Which is another cool thing about Emerson that I can't say about any other knife company. You can go to their website and you can order different pocket clips for like $5 a piece, $10. And some of them will have like the Emerson skull logo on them, or Jolly Roger or something like that. They just have clips with different finishes. You can get a satin finished clip. You can also order new screws. You can order different screws. You know, if some of these strip or you lose some, you can order new ones independently. So yeah, if you just wanted to, you know, if there's nothing wrong with your clip, you just wanted another one to maybe try to modify or whatever, you can order one. You can also order pivots that instead of, they're decorative, so instead of being flat here, it has like an Emerson skull on it, which looks really cool. You can get the different thumb discs. That's like a 45 caliber, which, you know, I made my own. But you can order them. They just have a lot of different neat options that you can order for this knife. Like I said, that I've never seen it from any other company. So that's really neat. But I think it's about all I can say about this knife, guys. It's great. I really love this knife, and I love the history and the lineage of this knife. It's the same reason why a lot of people are attracted to the K-Bar USMC fighting knife. It's because they know that men have used these knives who fought and died for our country. Same can be said about Emerson knives. These knives are carried by men and women every day who serve and fight for this country. So I think that is very cool. It gives this knife a lot of value to me. So it is different than all my other knives. You know, it's not buttery smooth like a Spyderco or this Maxpedition Excelsa. You know, it doesn't have as tight of lockup as some other knives, or, you know, it's not as light as other knives or whatever. Which, by the way, I forgot to mention, but this knife weighs about 3.8 ounces, a little bit under 4. But, you know, this knife gives me something that a lot of my other knives can't. And that's, like I said, that history, that cool factor that, like I said, astronauts carry these knives and our military carries these knives. It's just really cool. It's like Juju1313 said in one of his Emerson videos. You know, it's like why you'd buy surplus items, because, you know that they have a history behind them. You know that men have used these who fought and died for this country. It just has that cool factor. So if you want a you know, great smooth knife, you know, go buy a Benchmade or Spyderco, whatever. But if you want a really cool knife with a very neat design, a great history, an outstanding warranty, very, very good warranty, and, you know, great cutting performance, great strength. You know, if you want a real tool of a knife, definitely look into Emerson knives. So, hope you guys enjoyed this review. Definitely go and check out Emerson knives. Check them out on Blade HQ because they have some really great deals on them. Hope you have a great rest of your day, guys. If you have any questions, let me know in the comments. Alright, guys, stay safe, stay sharp, and God bless. Sherman 614. Peace.